Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along the way. And thanks for coming along for another trip down the road with me. A lot of exciting things are happening. So on a personal level, some of the exciting things is that two of the shows that I've been working on throughout the pandemic, and one for a very long time and one not quite as long, but nonetheless just quite as exciting. Not dropping the names of all these just yet. We're gonna wait until the projects drop, and I don't always know how each of the persons that I work with are feeling about sharing this. I guess there is a sort of element within the world of show folks such as myself and others where we believe that all material created in a show needs to somehow be directly and only created by one person. I mean, I don't know, it's a caricature, but I certainly have that feeling sometimes that we all kind of expect that the material, each joke and each thing is completely unique, or that we're sort of striving towards that within, not everybody. Some people just steal lines and steal whole bits and steal acts and bits of costume and just copy, and that's all right. But we got to copy and then combine all the different things we're inspired by, and then transform those into our own show. There's certainly a borrowing and lending, but we got to add to it. But perhaps this that's a little sort of diversion on that thought, but just that I think I'm not always sure if everybody is so happy to share who it is that I'm working with. But all I can say is that one of the shows that I'm working with, I've been happy and blessed to be allowed to work on, is the show that's opening now. Tickets have just gone on sale for the Fringe Festival in Perth in Western Australia. So that's very exciting. Perth has been blessed also to not have to be going through the terrible lockdowns that a lot of the rest of the world has, into a lot smaller degree. So that's exciting, very exciting in fact. And another show is becoming all the more real. Both of the shows, so all the shows are coming more and more real. I mean, some of them are fully fleshed out and realized, and I'm going to do some traveling and meet up in the flesh with one of them, the show that's opening in New York in January. And there the theatre has just been hired and contracted, and it's all very, very exciting. So now the show is happening in real life as well. So that's all very good, because that's all part of this, all that stuff that we've been talking about. When I tell you about it, sometimes it feels abstract, sometimes it feels like it's not quite real world, but that is because I am now giving you as I mentioned last time, like the kind of the theoretical and philosophical underpinnings of all these things. How do I get up with these? How do I come to these ideas, and what is the material that I draw on when I work? And I'm just like laying out the tools now, and maybe some of these tools, like if I laid out the tools of a carpenter and a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver or whatever, chisel, then you might know them and know roughly what they're being used for. But if you took out the tools from what is an unusual occupation, I mean, well, you'd expect that if somebody took out certain bits of magic apparatuses and placed them on in front of you, you'd not necessarily understand what they were about. Or if you were somebody who is doing some sort of airplane engineering or whatever, and they put out these specialized tools, and you'd look at them and you go, maybe these are that. And anyway, you need a specialized person to be able to wield those tools. So the tools aren't immediately obvious. These tools that I'm talking about are, along this second season, are tools that we will be able to use, that I am using, and that you, if you take them on and think about them, you'll find them reflected in your own work. And the beautiful thing now with having shows open and acts developed that I've done earlier this year, that has then gone on and done bits on television, and the artists who perform them feel like, oh, this has really been a benefit. So all of that has all been so great, because it's part of the kind of what I feel like will be the second step of this process, is to write a sort of handbook of showmanship, as I mentioned last time, just to make a one which is very specific on how to create shows of the kind that I am talking about now, and these shows that are opening now, and analysis that I'm doing of the process that I've gone through to help aid people and guide people, which I think is what a director does. It sort of just points in directions like, what about over there? What about over there? And when we agree that this is a good place to go, then based either on knowledge that I have directly from working on shows of my own or some of the many artists that I've worked with before, then I might know a good way to get there. And of course, each of the artists that I work with are professionals as well. I haven't been working with somebody who just starts out and going like, what could I do? Everybody has strong ideas and they have a lot of work in their back pocket that they've already done. So yeah, where it's been great doing these collaborations. So that's been very exciting for me, seeing the Way of the Showman becoming a little more real out into the world. And what's exciting about is also that Australia, Melbourne, has come out of their lockdown. That happened kind of a while ago actually, but now it's all real. They've been in the longest lockdown in the world, 262 days. In lockdown with homeschooling, and I did homeschooling for the last from March until the end of the school year in America, and I talked about that last season, and that's hard. And since we got back to Norway, there was I think there was 2 weeks of lockdown. Apart from that, everything has been open here, so that's congratulations to all the Melburnians and all people in Victoria and all over Australia. It's all looking good. Vaccination rates are going upwards, and it is having a very real and direct effect. It looks like the borders will be open. It might be open by the time this episode comes out. So it's all very exciting to see the world returning for real, and hopefully it'll stay like that this time. And finally, what's exciting is that a few weeks ago now, my good friend Jay Gilligan and his partner in crime, Eric Orberg, has started releasing the second season of their podcast, Object Episodes. And just like to talk a little bit about episode 1 there. They are talking about a concept which they sort of call folk circus. And they're not coining a new or creating a new genre. They're just sort of pointing out a kind of work where the artist, asking the kind of circus that we do, where we just, all these gigs where you just pop up somewhere in one place and you do this sort of plug and play show, and we don't have great scenery, we don't have huge backup apparatuses of set designers and costume designers and workers to help us bump in and bump out. And they've called that folk circus, sort of drawing on this idea of like folk music, even though they might in the episode sort of go, maybe this is not the best name because of some breakdown of the metaphor or whatever, of the link with folk circus or folk music. But anyway, this idea really have come now to see me being able to arrive pretty much anywhere. All my gear needs to come in, out, and it needs to be able to fit within many different contexts, and having that flexibility within it. That all is find that to be a sort of description of myself and the kind of showmanship that I am promulgating here along the way. So to get the full lowdown of and this great it's like by naming something, you make it a thing in the world that you can see, oh, this is a thing, and this exists within this scope. And you can, so hearing their discussion there in the first episode of Object Episodes, absolutely interesting, even if it's a podcast that is coming from the perspective of, it's of a showman, of course, but it's from the specific perspective of two very thoughtful and masters of the craft of juggling. So it comes from that perspective, but as with anything, and as we talked about last time, we can use any bit of cultural creation, be it Jack London's story, How to Build a Fire, that I suggested somebody read or listen to, and perhaps see it through the lens of showmanship. What if this story is actually about a showman? What does this tell you? So this gets to metaphor or whatever. Anyway, object episodes, you'll find it wherever you get this podcast. You'll find object episodes as well. Go and check that out. So, after all that talk about all sorts of stuff, let's get back to the way. Now, the last trip we took together was to go through the territory of showmanship and understanding showmanship, and I did what I feel like is some important work that I have done, and it's not groundbreaking. None of the stuff that I do is like, I'm not trying to invent something new. I'm trying to point out categories or aspects of what already is there, much like the folk circus that they talked about in object episodes. So I say what are the fundamental and essential components of showmanship, and that is to me the showman and the audience. This is where it all starts. These two entities are needed, and when these two meet in a particular way, then what happens between them, this kind of dialogue, that's the show. And this arising of that, of the show out of the meeting of these two, that sort of creates this lovely little triangle or triad of phenomenons where all are sort of linked, and you can't get one without the other, and so forth. So show arises from the meeting of showman and audience, but it's not just enough that a showman just wanders into an audience. That doesn't necessarily make a show. They need to be connected in a way, and that way is through attention. And we will talk in depth about this attention in a future episode, but we talked about a bunch about what attention was last time too, and we'll look further into it. This is like a little just bringing up those three ideas, these three, or actually then the four of course. It's the showman that meets the audience that creates the show. This is so fundamental that it might also seem abstract or like it does not apply to everyday use, but to me this is so valuable, and it is a big part of what taking on showmanship as a way to view the world, like an actual world view. You can see this as a fundamental pattern in human interaction all across everywhere. So we have the showman and the audience, and they meet, and if they meet in this particular type of shared attention where one is having something to show and the others are taking on the listening and watching role, then something else emerges, a new space, the midway, the meeting point or the area of interest. So that leaves us with the we talked about it as almost like a formula that the showman plus audience plus attention equals show. Maybe the showman plus attention plus audience, that the attention is what brings together these two, that's why it's in the middle, and this equals a show. So these are the four elements of showmanship as I see it. And then we looked at metaphor, really. We looked at the metaphor and I talked about how we've already talked about everything that we do is a process and not a thing. And when we did that, we broke down fire, as in what we sit around at night. We broke that down into a process of something that ignites fuel and then creates heat and light. And as we looked at this metaphor, we looked at it back and forth to see both what we can learn, because the thing is with metaphors is that they always go both ways. Like if we like Homer say that we say that a man is like a rock being splashed by the waves and all that, then we're not just saying that the rock, we're not just anthropomorphizing the rock, we're also in a sense making the human being a bit more like a stone. So the metaphor always goes both ways, and that's what we looked at last time. We looked at the details of just how much interesting overlap there might be. What would the attention then be? And that is, the attention is what we talked about. That's the right condition and the kindling and stuff. So yeah, anyway, you can go back and listen to this, but I still find this aspect of what the metaphor is, because metaphor is sometimes something we think about it as something poetic that's added on top of or whatever, but I'm more and more coming to understand that metaphor is actually like a fundamental aspect of how we think. We understand one thing by comparing it to or connecting it to something else that we understand, and in all ways that this ends up going back to our bodies, how we relate to specific things in the world. And this makes metaphors more powerful than just a poetic thing that we add on top of it. When I say that circus is like life, or circus is life, then we end up with a really rich metaphor, and that is what we're going to explore today. Not quite as what are we going to call it, grand or fancy as circus is life. I'm going to, at some point I started looking at geometry, because I kind of started thinking about the showman as a point, and another point over on the other side is the audience, and then I initially sort of started thinking of geometry. And as I started to look into that, I spent, like during the winter last year, I spent quite a lot of time looking into it and comparing it and seeing what is it that I can learn from this. And the metaphor just kept sort of evolving through looking at the aspects of geometry next to showmanship, and that is what we are going to do today, and that's what we're going to do right now. The Geometry of Showmanship. After my playful and impressive attempts at creating mathematical sounding formulas last episode, now let's channel Euclid and give geometry a go. So I began to look into this with my tongue firmly in my cheek, but as I persisted at pursuing this analogy or metaphor, I let my tongue relax, and eventually my jaw slackened, because who would have thought that expressing showmanship through geometry would be a fruitful undertaking? Well, as it turns out, that's actually what it is, certainly to me, for those who are interested in this kind of stuff. Because I think personally I do have a penchant for the natural sciences as applied by mystics and 19th century naturalists. I like the work of Charles Darwin and his co-discoverer of natural selection, Charles Russell Wallace, who apparently grasped the mechanism of evolution in a malarian fever dream, and then became the co-discoverer of evolution in the original paper published by Darwin and Wallace. And also I like the way that Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, how he made some remarkable contributions to science whilst also being a formidable poet. And his ideas of the metamorphosis of plants is still a fruitful, pardon the pun, topic for research. We'll look more into Goethe in some later episodes. And I love the idea of a salon where entertainment and science and a love for all that is interesting in the world can be celebrated, where anything and everything can be inserted into an evening of enjoyment and edification, from the realm of circus and slapstick, clowning, infused with music, both classical and contemporary, and also remarkable presentations of curious facts and findings from the realms of science, mathematics, and history, complete with blackboards and drawings and diagrams in colored chalk to amplify the apprehension. It is with these things in mind that I present the following Nerdfest. In the beginning. So the exploration starts with a single point, and the single point of the lone showman, a tiny fire of enthusiasm that burns in his heart, but alone he is naught but a singularity in the emptiness of existence. If I were to draw this out on a blackboard, he would be but one white point of chalk in an ocean of black. Much like in the Viking myths of northern mythology, where the actual creation of the universe features two poles of heat and cold. One's called Muspelheim and the other is Niflheim, appearing in the endless void of what's called Ginnungagap. And in the Nordic creation myth, the process of showmanship sort of in the same way becomes possible when there are two poles. Actually, there always is two poles, as poles always comes as dualities. You can't have a south pole without a north pole. Not on a planetary body or not on a magnet. Even on a flat magnet, the underneath side of it. So even if these flat earthers with their peculiar ideas, there will still be a south pole, even if it's just underneath the disk. The two poles, these are the two poles which gets the creation of showmanship started. Just like these two poles of hot and cold is what gets the creation, or to get something from nothing in northern mythology, with Odin and Thor. So, these two poles for us are when the single lone white chalk dot on the big black vast emptiness of the blackboard gets another dot next to it. And that's the showman that finds his audience. Then an entire new domain can come into being. And the process of showmanship begins when the showman and audience meets, facing each other. And we can see this in geometry, in how we can always draw a straight line between 2 points. 2 points connected becomes a line. Each point is equal distance from the other. There is no direction implied in the line, there's just a line. One end, one. If we write in Norwegian or English, we write from right to left, and if we write in Arabic, we write the opposite way. So we might feel like the line goes a little bit from right to left, or up or down, but in reality each point is equal in measuring each other up. They are on the same level, and the two are equally connected to each other, and their relationship is of mutual interest. It goes just as much from the audience to the showman as vice versa. 2 dots connected with a line. And once these two have been connected, the line being the correct conditions, or the good conditions for it, then we get the emergence of the meeting point. Because when a showman and an audience meets, 2 points staring at each other, a tension builds. As the points connect, there is attention, a tension. This back and forth attention is a meeting, a coming together. In shared attention, the two comes face to face with the conversational nature of reality. The attention grows, and the coming together becomes more real. It grows from the tension of attention, like in northern mythology, where the primordial giant Ymir and the primordial cow Audhumla, in the Nordic myth, they merge in the intersection of hot and cold, between the poles of hot and cold. And in the meeting of hot and cold, fire and ice, crystal and liquid, something new emerges in the myths. And something new, and that is life. Life, of course, has a strangely liquid flow to it. It's made of meat and needs to have nourishment and liquid constantly flowing through it to not cease living. Well, there could arguably be other things than meat, but we're not going to go that far into it. But between the poles of hot and cold, there arises a new form of dynamic solid, something which is distinct in itself, yet in a state of dynamic equilibrium. It's a process and not a thing which arises between the hot and cold Muspelheim and Niflheim. And in the mythology this happens in the form of a giant, which eventually forms the whole world and everything when he's slain, and a cow. And I find this oddly and charmingly funny that there is a cow present at the dawn of existence in the northern mythology. But in showmanship, what emerges between the poles of the showman and the audience is the show. Now the tension between the showman and the audience grows until it becomes a new form of dynamic solid. A new point emerges between them, a meeting point. The two becomes three. With this meeting point, this point of attention, this point of shared interest, the process of showmanship is on its way. The show emerges. And the show is the third point. Not altogether showman, nor altogether audience, but altogether both. Going back to geometry, in the meeting and joining together, the line of connection becomes something more. This process, or image of a coming into being, is deeply allegorical, and it fits many kinds of coming together into a higher unity. It could equally well illustrate how many individuals forge and become an audience. It can picture how tribes are forged into cohesive groups, which then can achieve great things which would be impossible for single individuals. The bringing together of individuals, the creation of the meeting point, is one of the core values of showmanship. It is how communities are formed and how shows emerge. This process of coming together is a synergy, which literally means the interaction or cooperation of someone to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effects. It's greater than the sum of its parts. The process of showmanship is synergistic. The sum of a show is greater than its constituent parts. So the meeting point, the third point on the line of the point between the showman and the audience, it rises from this line because it's not quite the same, so it can't be quite on the same line, and this rises the point off the line and becomes a third point only because the first line and the first meeting and the tension of attention between the showman and the audience meets. Then the point lifts up, and that once we have 3 points in this, then we get another shape, because in this ideal point, the point of the show is centered sort of above the audience showman line, and each point is equally far away from each other, which means that it forms a triangle. When a meeting point emerges and becomes a point different from audience and showman, 2 more lines can be drawn, and we draw them and they form a triangle as the show point lifts up off the line, signifying that it is the same as yet more than the sum of the showman and audience parts. Something new emerges, and we see this signified in the creation of a whole new kind of space. There is no space in a point. A point does not have any length, width, shape, or size. It has only a position. And when 2 distinct points are connected, they form a line. But a line has very negligible width and breadth. It can only have either length or width. The distance between the points can only signify 1, never really 2. Whilst once we get third point, then we get a triangle, and this has both. We get width and length. Thus, inside the triangle appears for the first time a space. A dot has no area, a line has no area. But when the 2 points pay attention to each other, and the tension creates a point, and pay attention to each other, then an area of interest is created. Area is a new dimension, the 2-dimensional space, which brings into being the show space, where time is measured as show time, the kind of time Henry Bergson calls duration, as opposed to the merely spatial division of time, which we find in clock time. So let's look at this. It's like difference between a line. As soon as you make a triangle, we have a space inside. That's the new arisen space. That's the show space. So let's look at this area of interest, because the regular meaning of interest is a state of wanting to know or learn about something or someone. It's just we want to know. We want to know about it or know about them. And this describes the state of mind necessary in the showman and audience for the process of showmanship to successfully create this other added dimension. We find this dimension in the origins of the word interest. Inter translates to between, and esse meaning to be. So literally interest means to be between, or in between being. Both of those meanings are valuable to picture geometrically how the point of interest gives rise to the area of interest. 2 points become the line, and this gives rise to the area of interest. As the show emerges from the shared state of interest, the area between the show space and a whole new domain arises. The triangle emerges when the process is in full swing, and in this moment, when it all connects up, a boundary forms. Once that appears, there is a definite inside and outside of the process. As we have drawn a triangle, there's now an area on the inside of the triangle, and then there's an area that is outside the triangle. And the showman, too, as we have spoken about at length, has an inside and an outside. So does each individual in the audience, and so does the audience as a group and as individuals. There's some people who are in the audience, some people are not in the audience, as well as the reality of the show itself, All of this has the show has something is in the show and something is not in the show. There's an inside to the show and there is an outside. There are things and concepts and people that are inside the show, and there are things and concepts and people that are outside the show. And we'll explore this further in a later chapter. After all, this is supposed to be the geometry chapter. Let's try and keep our ducks in a row. So, if there is no meeting point, then there is no show. And when the meeting point emerges, it's like the showman audience line sprouts arms, at the points at the very end, with the 2 points of the showman and audience as shoulders or elbows, and the arms then reaches up and joins hands, forming a triangle. So now let's get some more geometry into this, because so far that sort of shaped the triangle. So just and already now we've some people might be going, I can't quite visualize this. I should maybe make a YouTube video of this and draw on the blackboard and all that. But anyway, to make sure that we lose all but the most hardcore nerds and symbolists, I do this not to punish you, dear listener, but to show just how deep these correlations go if you care to look. Now, in any proper Euclidean triangle, the sum of the angles is 180 degrees. Each triangle has 3 internal angles, and an angle is measured in degrees. The sum of the degrees of the 3 angles always add up to 180 degrees. This is just the way it is with triangles. A classic equilateral triangle is made from 360 degree angles. And this means that each of the 3 sides become the same length, which is what equilateral... I can't say that word particularly well. It's something that I think about a lot, or I read about, but I don't actually it doesn't come up very much in average conversations. Equilateral. So that all the lines are the same length. That's what equilateral means. Equilateral. 3 times 60 adds up to a neat 180 degrees. So if you draw lines from 2 points on a line where the sum of the 2 angles exceeds 180 degrees, meaning that those angles are going sort of outwards, then the 2 lines won't meet. If one of the angles is 95 degrees and the other is 100, the lines will sort of point outwards in a distorted, ever-widening, square-bottomed U-shape. This is not a triangle. If the lines are drawn straight up from the points in perfect 90-degree angles, we will get a square U shape with two parallel lines pointing straight upwards into infinity. Two lines drawn at 90 degrees, they form the so-called straight lines, like what we find in a corner of a room or edges of a square brick, unless we assume that the two parallel lines formed by the 90-degree angles meet in infinity. This is not a triangle either. But this meeting in infinity thing is actually a real thing in what's called projective geometry, but this we will not talk about today. So with no third meeting point between showman and audience, there is no show. This could be an illustration of a situation where we have a showman and an audience, 2 points on the line, but where the audience would rather talk amongst themselves and enjoy their drinks and finger food. Without shared attention, a straight, unbroken line between the 2 points, there is no show. When the two angles add up to more than 180 degrees, we do not get a meeting point. We get a gaping, open shape. There is no tension. There is no attention. Without the meeting point, the point of interest, we do not get the emergence of the show point, so we do not get a triangle, and we do not get an area of interest. Thus we see that the process of showmanship does not get underway, and there is no formation of an area of interest, which is the whole realm of the show. As much as the mathematical equation that I made earlier were somewhat whimsical, we do find the results of audience plus no showman does not equal a show. That is kind of now backed up, if you can call it that, by this peculiar geometrical proof. The geometry of a triangle does seem to fit quite exquisitely. So, as whimsical as this kind of is, we still see it now reflected again, or actually, like, it all connects up, and that's the hallmark of a good metaphor, that it goes both ways and it keeps backing each other up, or keeps being the same. Because in any metaphor, it's like it is when we say, like, there's the clash of two symbols, but it's also the clash of arguments, or a clash of colors. It might seem that this is quite abstract, but it is something that we actually understand in our body and connect as, and this is a real connection. It's something that we actually experience. Yeah. Anyway, the triangle is a transformed line. And we have learned that the sum of 3 angles of a triangle is exactly 180 degrees. And now we add to this mysterious fact that a line stretching from one point to another is also exactly 180 degrees. If you place a compass on a line and draw a circle with a diameter smaller than the line, then the line will neatly dissect the circle exactly in half. A circle is divided up into 360 degrees, and a half of that is 180 degrees. Sometimes this is complicated. I mean, sometimes the hardest things to define are the most basic. Might sound weird, but if you're interested, Google this and you can find reasons and proof for why a line is 180 degrees. But in this sense, knowing that the line is 180 degrees from one point to another, but also knowing that a triangle has each of the 3 points creates an angle on the inside, and those points always add up to 180 degrees. This is how a triangle is a transformed line. So a triangle is 180 degrees, and a line is also 180 degrees. A line and a triangle are essentially deeply similar, but also essentially different. No third grader would ever mistake the two. You will always be able to tell the difference between a line and a triangle, yet in a very real geometric sense they are the same. And to me this is proof, in quotation marks, is a perfect picture that the something extra which appears in the show is not added from anything external. It comes from what is already inherent in the line and in the points, from the showman and the show, the audience. So it's the same, yet qualitatively different. The meeting point absolutely transforms the line, and the showmanship triangle emerges without adding anything extra from the outside, from outside the audience and the showman. It gives and takes equally from both, and yet, quite literally, the meeting point and a whole new dimension is added, the area of interest. A triangle as transformed line further illustrates beautifully how, in the real life situation, the showman and the audience is all that's physically present. The show, as we have discussed, is of a different nature. It's a process and not a thing. It is something which emerges from the meeting of the two, and between them, in their coming together, a literal new dimension appears. 100% human created, which means it's 100% artificial. Artificial, of course, meaning made by human beings. For human beings. I mentioned that thing with the artificial, of course, because that's the last line of the illuminated showman's manifesto. So, to continue one step further here, to introduce one more idea that can be fleshed out in great detail, but here we will just have a cursory glance at, is we could then assign meaning and find meaning in the varying triangle sides. From Euclidean geometry, we learned that any 3 points, if not on a line, can be joined together in a triangle. This means that the triangle comes in all shapes and sizes. With variations in the angles, the different sides of the triangle becomes different lengths. Since we have assigned meaning to each point, showman, audience, and show, it seems to me that we could then see the lengths of the different sides as reflections of the relationships between the points. A triangle's shape and varying side lengths would become meaning-bearing and symbolic. If each triangle would describe one particular occurrence of the process of showmanship, like one particular performance of a show, then the different and differing shapes of the triangle could tell us something about the nature of that particular show. This gives great room for exploration of significance. The distortion of angles and line lengths could create a shorthand visualization of each one of your acts, for instance. It doesn't have to be for a show today, but any kind of act of showmanship could be described by a triangle. It could be used as a conceptual sketch of an act you want to create, or as an intention for a particular performance of one of your existing acts, or as a review of a performance you did, by drawing it out, and then you'd get the relation between the showman and audience, and the audience and the show, and the show and the whatever. As an example, let's say you think about the act you just did and draw a quick review on some paper, or make it in your head. Let's say the line between showman and audience is very long, and the one between showman and show is quite short. This could mean that the show you just did had an audience that was quite drunk, and your attention was used on audience management rather than the flow of the show. Since there only are 180 degrees available in any triangle, if your attention goes into managing the audience, some of your attention will be taken from your relationship to the show aspect. This will alter the length of the triangle in such a way that that line will be shorter. So let's look at the value of symbols. But I am by now assuming that I have lost the interest of most of you, or lost you just then you don't quite get what I'm talking about. Or maybe you do, because after all you have come along with me on this journey until here. If this is your first episode, then, who knows what you will think of this. But if you've come along all the way, then learning to see the value of symbols and of metaphor and using that to understand what we do, that is a big aspect of what it is that we're doing here. We're making sure that the way of the showman, as in our lives and livelihoods, is seen in a wider context. So there is probably a few of you, like yourself, who, like me, will marvel at this richness of correlation. And I find it very satisfying when a symbolic image just keep giving insights, and when you study it at length and depth. This triangle symbol is a key element in how I use the ideas to quickly assess, show as I see, and quickly grasp what I see. The triangle does not offer ultimate or final truths, but it offers me a simplification, a rough map of a complex territory. I believe a big reason symbols are so valuable is that they are dynamic. Their meaning and usefulness grows with the person who is studying and reflecting upon them. Symbols grow on you and in sync with you. As I learn more things, as I think more things, a fertile symbol, and particularly if there are a few symbols interacting, the new things I've learnt and thought can become a part of the meaning held by the symbol. And this is what I mean by the symbol growing in sync with you. In this way, symbols can become lifelong companions, always expanding and growing to encompass more of you and more of your insights and connections. As you grow and return to the symbol, you find ways to map the growth of yourself onto the symbol and making it even grander and richer and a better carrier of meaning and truth. Symbols can in that way sort of function like a memory palace for those who know about that mnemonic concept. These are the reasons why I include all this talk about the triangles and geometry. I find it to be such a useful tool in exploring showmanship from a supremely different vantage point than most people. It is abstract, of that there is no doubt. But when you look at something from a new angle, geometry pun intended, you do see it differently. As the famous Norwegian author Henrik Ibsen wrote, the weirder the starting point, the more original the result. Following this maxim, these obscure geometric explorations might seed original work. That would be lovely. And the triangle is a perfect symbolic representation, since it offers not just a quick way of illustrating and drawing connections between three of the essentials of showmanship, but that the more you look, the more the symbol seems to give and correlate it. The metaphor works by each one carrying over, and you learn by one by looking at the other, just like you can learn by the other by looking at the one. So this means there is plenty of room for that dynamic growth that we talked about. And at this point, the observant listener will notice that a triangle only has 3 points, but we have found the essentials of showmanship to number 4 elements. How is this attention thing going on? The triangle fits showman, audience, and show perfectly. And the show beautifully emerges like the rising sun over the horizon created by the line connecting showman and audience. And it's so complete and self-contained. So, how would the shared attention be represented? Since it is only through shared attention that the triangle of showmanship becomes something more than just a geometric flashback from your days of being tortured with them by your math teacher at school. We can't not have it represented in the symbol. We need attention. Without attention, all we have is a triangle. And without shared attention, showmanship collapses. So without it, represented in our symbol, the symbol, in a sense, collapse. And I will leave you all there hanging for a moment, because to get to that, I want to level with you first and tell the truth about how I actually discovered the triangle of showmanship, and thus the whole domain of showmanship geometry in the first place. But to hear about that, you have to hold on to your seats and wait and be excited. And as we say in Norway, smear yourselves with patience, for that will be the topic of next episode of this exciting second season of The Way of the Showman. And there we have it, one more leg along the journey. And this time we've really delved deep into it. And this is just one more example of how I kind of see showmanship in all sorts of structures, whether it is all kind of human interactions when we look at art, like we talked about, or it is like today, where we look at a triangle. And by looking in this particular kind of way, with an open, active imagination, being careful not to go completely off on the deep end, we see parallels in these metaphors that just helps connect what we do further to the world, and also then by having it having these mirror images in geometry and in life and in myths, we kind of start to see that what we do is deeply meaningful, and the structures that are found within the most basic ways that we look at our craft and look at what we do. It all means that when somebody says, can this really be a real job? You can go, oh yes, it can. And when you say it and the way we view it all, then that helps just place us into the world. And that's where a lot of this sprung from. Just that simple irritation of the very nature of watching what we do makes it seem frivolous, but it is all, but it's absolutely not frivolous. So that leaves us hanging, and we will be talking further on a completely different kind of symbolic triangle next week, and it'll be related directly to a show that I did, and it'll be a mini kind of epiphany that I had and the starting point of a lot of the stuff. So there'll be a little more personal story next week. Not next week, next episode. So if again, I thank you very much for listening. There's so much great feedback from people out there. Thank you so much. And you can send me an email at thewayoftheshowman@gmail.com and offer any thoughts or suggestions, or tell me about as you get your compass and ruler out and start looking at these geometrical proofs on your own time. If you make any more discoveries, please share them with me, and I will talk about it in the future. But anyway, please also, if you have 5 minutes, share the episodes. Something has happened with I cannot make ads anymore due to some sort of error, so I have lost the ability to make ads. So anyway, I don't know how much more money Facebook needs, even though it helps me. So I think they will probably be okay, even though I can't anymore pay for ads to help spread the beautiful message of the way of the showman. But that's where I ask you to just share one of the episodes with a friend, or share it on your Facebook or on your Instagram or on your Snapchat or on your TikTok. Make a little dance about it. That would be something to see. And if not, you can always buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/CaptainFrodo. And that's all those things that we normally have to say at the end. Please interact. Please tell your friends and send them along. And that's all I'm going to say for today. So that means that all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love. And I hope to see you along the way.